Hey, good evening to you both, and let's begin with the NDP winning 2 of the 3 seats up for grabs in Monday's by-elections. Party leader Naheed Nenshi now has a seat in the legislature, earning more than 80% of the vote in Edmonton, Strathcona. NDP also claiming victory in Edmonton, Ellersley, and the UCP retained Olds, Didsbury, Three Hills, with candidate Tara Sawyer taking 61% of the vote, and the NDP finishing ahead of the Republican Party of Alberta. Janet, let's start on Naheed Nenshi to win Edmonton Strathcona with 82% of the vote. How far does that go to solidifying his grip on NDP leadership?
Well, it was a very good night for Nenshi and for the NDP. And so he won that riding. None of us were surprised, but he did win it quite decisively. Voter turnout was low, as it always is in a by-election, but as a percent of vote, he did quite well. And now he can line up the 82% approximately that he got last night with what he got in the leadership review and or what he got in the leadership election. So even though he was expected to win, it was a strong showing, a good night. And then also in Ellerslie, it was a good night for the NDP because that was a riding where there were some question marks. The NDP lost support overall in Ellerslie, but they managed to maintain it. So I'd say, 1 point for the NDP last night to have hung on.
Duane, given the legislature does not now sit for another 4 months, how much of a difference does it make that Naheed Nenshi actually has a seat? How steep a hill does he and the party still face?
So the complaint that's been raging for about a year is, where is Naheed Nenshi? Well, come fall, we'll know where he is, and it's the legislature. And then the question is, does that change anything? The UCP waited as long as I think that they could before they called the by-election in Strathcona. And I think that was to keep Naheed out of the legislature during the spring sitting. So now that excuse can't be raised anymore about where is Nenshi. He will be in the legislature. Does that change anything? Because bear in mind, while he may be a strong debater, he's never been in a legislature before. His background is municipal politics, so this will be a first for him.
Janet, yeah, he told us he's already put his stamp on the party. Does he need to put more of a Naheed Nenshi stamp on the NDP?
Absolutely, yes, he does. There was great excitement when Nenshi was first elected leader of the NDP, and people were really looking forward to the direct, head-to-head confrontation of Smith versus Nenshi. And, although I think being outside of the legislature is maybe only one of the reasons that Nenshi struggled to thrive as leader, I think we're all looking forward to seeing him in the House and seeing that debate. But, since he won the leadership, there was great excitement. But then they just have, I think world events, provincial events, things have transpired, and the NDP have just not been able to really get their message aside. I recently did a poll for CBC that shows that Danielle Smith is hanging on to that coalition that won her the election, and the NDP is struggling to maintain their support. So, this will change the dynamic, and coming back in the fall, the goal of the NDP has got to be to get on the map and start looking like a genuine competitor to the UCP.
Duane, keeping in mind those poll results, surprised the UCP didn't make a breakthrough in Edmonton, Ellerslie?
They really hoped that they could, and they didn't. And not just on the poll results, but also the federal election results. But again, as we have seen so often in Edmonton, voters vote conservative federally and then vote for either the Liberals or the NDP provincially. It's been an interesting dynamic there. And so when we look at all the by-elections, not just yesterday, but the previous ones, it's all been status quo. The UCP has held the seats that they had previously won. The NDP has held the seats that they previously won. There has been no switch.
Janet, how close a race were you anticipating in Olds, Didsbury, Three Hills? And what does the UCP winning there with 61% of the vote suggest?
Well, a couple of months ago, I really wondered whether they'd be able to hang on. And Nenshi himself talked about, the vote in that part of the city during the federal election. And, we saw Amarjeet Sohi failed to to win in that section of the city when he looked like a potential pickup for the Liberals. So a couple of months ago, after the federal election, I really had my doubts about the NDP. Looking at my own polling, I saw that they were really sort of struggling in Edmonton. But I've seen strength for the NDP coming back in Edmonton. So I didn't do any specific polling in Ellersley, but my model did say that the NDP would squeak through and win it, and their percent of vote was down, but winner takes all, they got it.
Duane, the Republican Party of Alberta finishing third in Old Didsbury Three Hills, behind the NDP. How big of a blow is that to the separatist movement?
I think it is a very big blow to the separatist movement. They were the UCP candidate was appointed, didn't go through a nomination. No one within the UCP during the by-election was talking about separatism. But the Republican Party made that their key message. And with everything that was going around and some of the polling that showed separation around 30%, and that was province-wide, you would think it'd be even stronger in a place like Old Didsbury. The fact that they got 18% of the vote, it's a bad day for the separatists. There's no doubt about that, and not just 18%, but finishing behind the NDP. So there's been a lot of spin by the separatists since last night about how, well, the Republicans weren't really separatists, and the real separatists are within the UCP, and don't worry, referendums will be different than an election. I don't know. I mean, we finally see it on a ballot, and it gets rejected pretty substantially. I think if they had got 35% of the vote, even if they didn't win the seat, that's what we would be talking about right now. The fact that they got half of that, I think it was not a good day, and they're going to have to figure out what they do next.
So, Janet, these three by-elections is a midterm test. What do the outcomes say then about the state of the political landscape in Alberta?
Well, it's hard to read too much into by-elections. They really are quite unique. Voter turnout is low because people know there's not a lot at stake. And it's an opportunity to send a message. I drove through Innisfil a couple of weeks ago, and there was a billboard from the Republican Party, and it said, "Send a message." And that's what by-elections are all about. It's just the opportunity to send a message. And, 18% of people who voted in Old Didsbury Three Hills, tried to send the message that the Republican Party wanted. But in all three of these ridings, most of the small percentage of people who showed up to vote said, "I'm okay with the status quo." And that just shows you how competitive Alberta politics continues to be, that it's hard for anybody to get a pickup in this political environment.
Duane, any chance of the UCP pondering an early election, even as it now launches its Alberta Next panel?
So I think back to the reason that we drafted a fixed election law. It's so that it would end speculation about the timing of elections. It has not worked. Not only do we violate the law, we continue to discuss this. And so, yeah, there's nothing stopping a government from calling an early election, no matter what the law says. And so does this go in conjunction or to replace a referendum on independence? Well, we'll have to see, but anything is possible. But I would still guess that we will be going to the polls in the fall of 2027.
U.S. President Donald Trump declaring today the Israel-Iran ceasefire is in effect. This after lashing out at both countries for violations.
You know what? We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing.
The U.S. president commenting before departing for the NATO summit at The Hague. Donald Trump announced the ceasefire after Iran hit back at the U.S. for attacking its nuclear sites. Okay, so Duane, not every day we hear a U.S. president dropping an F-bomb, but what's to be made of the Trump tirade on the White House lawn? How warranted were those frustrations?
Well, they're warranted because he wants success, and he's trying to claim success for all of this. And it's not about him. In fact, how do you argue? We have just launched a major strike on Iran. We've allowed the Israelis to launch a major attack, and now we want to pause everything, and we're upset with the other two parties, right? And this idea that they've been fighting for so long, Well, they may have in proxy wars, but the first time that there was direct conflict between Israel and Iran was a year ago. And that was minor compared to what we've seen over the last week and a half. So I think Trump is frustrated because he wants a win. It doesn't matter what it is, he wants a win. And he keeps declaring a win, and then events follow up where it's not a win. And that's what he's most frustrated about.
Janet, obviously achieving peace is the goal, but what is hinging on that win, on the success of a ceasefire where Donald Trump is concerned?
Well, yeah, peace is the goal, but but peace is another thing for Donald Trump, right? It's his success, it's his victory. He's very preoccupied with the Nobel Peace Prize and things like that. So I think we'll all benefit if there's just peace at the end of this. But the goal is to get peace under Donald Trump's terms. So anyway, I think we're just in a phase of this conflict right now where things are very, very tentative. We won't know for weeks exactly how accurate the U.S. attacks on nuclear outlets were. We won't know that until the intelligence is in. We will not know if this ceasefire holds. These are very, very tenuous times right now. Lives are at stake. And, I think it's the real bombs that are dropping that are more important than the F bombs. And you kind of wish that the people who were leading this had level heads, because this is very serious.
So, Duane, how necessary was it then for the U.S. to insert itself in that conflict by dropping bombs of its own on Iran?
So you've got to look at Israel. Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu has been saying, and I've got quotes from him going back to the late 1990s, with Netanyahu saying Iran is 6 months away from developing a bomb. He's been saying that for 25 years. We also know that he has been constrained by previous American governments from taking direct action against Iran himself, and the Americans refused to intervene themselves. That all changed under President Trump. And I think Netanyahu has played Trump like a fiddle. That is what has led Trump in there. When I say Trump always wants a win, when he was watching how successful the Israeli strikes were on various facilities, he wanted in. He wanted to get credit as well. So he flew a dangerous mission, but where Israel had already established air superiority over Iranian airspace. That made it much more easier for the Americans to go in. We know the Americans have caused some damage, but there's three things that Iran needs to develop a bomb. One is intellectual capacity. They still have that. The second is the actual fuel that they enrich to 60% that they need to enrich to 90%. There is no evidence whatsoever that any of that fuel was damaged. And in fact, the evidence suggests that it wasn't damaged because there's been no heightened radiation detection. And the third thing is the centrifuge capacity of the Iranians, which was those underground facilities that the U.S. hit because the Israelis could not hit. Those are damaged. How badly damaged are they? Are they 6 months setback? Are they a year setback? They're certainly not permanently setback. And so while the Americans declared victory Sunday morning, by Tuesday, it now looks much more blurry that yes, it was a hit. Yes, it was damaging, but we don't know how bad. And so that is, I think, the frustration that Trump has, is perhaps realizing that he's been doing the dirty work for Benjamin Netanyahu.
All right. Janet, last 30 seconds to you. Plenty of calls for de-escalation from world leaders, Canada's PM included. What kind of pressure does this conflict now put on the NATO summit getting underway in the Netherlands?
Well, you think about our prime minister, and this is still very early days for him. And, we've said this many times, he's a new parliamentarian, but he has been thrust into the world stage because he had to host the G7. Now he's off to NATO. But I think right now he's flying high in the polls because Canadians like his unflappability. And so I think a lot of Canadians will just find comfort that he's there and he's keeping track of things and he's not easily flappable as other world leaders seem to be.
All right. We are out of time. Have to leave it there. Good to see you both. Thank you for this.
Hey, thanks, Michael. Thanks, Janet.
Thank you. Thank you.